right, so for the past couple of weeks, we've all seen the coordinated meltdown. The entire political and media establishment, from Megyn Kelly to Ben Shapiro, has been on a nonstop tour to tell you who you're supposed to hate this week. They've been working overtime. But what if all that outrage is just a script? What if it's a carefully coordinated damage control operation? I just watched a clip that I believe pulls back the curtain and exposes their entire playbook for everyone to see. This isn't about some offensive words anymore. This is about a desperate establishment that knows it has lost control of the narrative, and they are now retreating to their last line of defense. This is the anatomy of a purge.
It's maybe important to say this after 2 weeks has passed from the Tucker interview. You know, this doesn't take away from the fact that all of their attacks on me have been unfair. It doesn't take away from the fact that a lot of that is a deflection. But we do have to be self-policing. And a lot of people say, what's the boundary? The boundary is when you start saying, screw a whole group of people and we want harassment and violence, because we don't. What we want is a level playing field. We want people with reasonable and justifiable positions to be able to get jobs and work in politics, to work at the Heritage Foundation, to be elected to Congress. We think congressmen should be able to say they don't want to give money to Israel. You know, these are the kinds of things that we're playing for. This is what is defensible. This is how we solve our problems. We don't solve our problems by, attacking people like that. So, and I'm not saying that to virtue signal. I'm saying that because if we want this political movement of ours, because we are a team, if we want this to have legs, if we want this to go the distance, we can't give into this sort of thing and the heckler and the mob mentality that says, oh, we're just going to go and attack them. No, trust me, that is the surest way to give them ammunition and then bring down the hammer on all of us and make us all look bad by association. We can have no tolerance for that.
Okay, stop for a second. This is actually a really important point. What he's doing here is explaining the dynamic of the fight. He's basically saying, don't fall into their trap. The establishment wants a fringe lunatic to give them an excuse. They need a heckler or a mob so they can get the ammunition to bring down the hammer on all of us. It's an admission that the other side doesn't argue in good faith. They don't want to debate ideas. They want to find a pretext to shut you down. And it seems like he's arguing that the only way to win is to not give them that pretext.
So I just want to say that at the very beginning, because like I said, a lot of things to cover. There's been kind of a lot of developments in the past couple weeks, and I think that's a very important thing to say. It tends to be, it feels like a chore. It's not the righteous indignation that we're used to. It's not fun. That's not really the battle, but it is something that we need to nip in the bud and sort of take care of. And I hope you understand where I'm coming from on that. And if you don't, I want nothing to do with you. But that's that. I do want to move on. I want to get into the situation with Ben Shapiro and this comment that he made on trigonometry. Like I said, some of the backlash from the Tucker Carlson interview, it seems to be winding down a little bit. So I don't know how much more will happen. There's a few things that we're watching with this, like, for example, the Heritage Foundation and whether Kevin Roberts will be fired or not. And of course, the whole situation in the Middle East. I'm sure we'll revisit that at some point this week, specifically in Lebanon and in Iran, possibly in Iraq. There's been some rumbling about that. But tonight, I want to give a little epilogue on all of it, and I want to talk about this comment that was made. Of course, Ben Shapiro has been on a tour in the past 2 weeks, and they all have. They have all been working overtime, the $7,000 Club, the Unit 8200, the Shills. We're talking about Joel Berry, Seth Dillon, Ben Shapiro, Mark Levin, Josh Hammer. They have been working overtime. They've been earning their shekels, earning their pieces of silver, betraying our country. They've been making the rounds, doing interviews, shows, posting on Twitter, because they recognize that Nick Fuentes is broken containment.
And there it is. That's the core of the issue. He lists off the names, Shapiro, Levin, the Daily Wire crew, and calls them shills betraying our country. What you're seeing is the unmasking of what people call conservative ink. It's this whole club in D.C. that doesn't really seem to serve the interest of its voters anymore. I believe they serve their donors. They serve their own careers. And now, someone has broken containment, the ideas are getting out, and the base is starting to listen to people who aren't on the approved list. So the entire machine has been activated to do damage control.
For 10 years, they tried to censor me, blacklist me in order to squelch and suppress my ideas, and they objectively lost that battle. The censorship is over. Comedy was legalized. Cancel culture's finished. All of that stuff is done. As a result, I have been surging throughout the year. My show is bigger than ever. I've been doing huge shows. And the more that I do big shows, the more legitimacy I gain. I'm popular, so I have the raw force of millions of fans, but I also now have legitimacy. I have real institutional figures that are willing to sit down and give me a fair hearing, and in doing so, they do legitimize me. And it's not just me doing the shows, but it's also my followers getting into government. The administration, the White House, the think tanks, Congress, in high-level media positions. I have fans or sympathizers everywhere. And so, as I said, in response to this crisis, there's been this damage control effort. Shapiro's been leading the charge. And we talked about this, I think, on Friday or Thursday. They're all saying something very specific, which I want to make clear. I want to reiterate this just briefly before we move on. They are all saying the exact same thing, and this is their playbook.
This right here is why they're panicking. For years, the establishment thought they had a monopoly on power because they controlled the institutions. The media, the think tanks, the parties. They figured as long as they control the official channels, they could control the country. But he's pointing out that it's not working anymore. He says he has fans or sympathizers everywhere, inside the administration, in Congress, in the media. It's like the peasants aren't just at the castle gates anymore. They're already inside the castle, working as guards and cooks, and the kings are just now realizing it.
It's not implicit. This is not a guess. This is not inside baseball. This is what they are broadcasting is their playbook. Like I said, Ross Douthat in the New York Times, he wrote this in an opinion piece, I think on Friday. So you can go and read this. And Shapiro was saying this, and Levin said this at the Republican Jewish Coalition. Their playbook is as follows. They acknowledge that they lost the battle to contain the ideas. You could say they lost the battle over the information space. They tried for 10 years and even longer to make it so that if you criticized Israel or talked about the lobby, that you could not have a social media platform. You would literally be banned permanently on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. And if you were banned from social media, you could never reach a massive audience because that's where people get their ideas. So they tried that. And for 10 years, they literally tried to suppress on the whole internet in all of America anybody who would talk about these things. And they failed.
This is, I think, the most insightful point in this whole thing. Their playbook has changed. He's arguing they've admitted they lost the first war, the war of open censorship. They tried for a decade, colluding with big tech, to make it so you couldn't criticize their sacred cows, and it failed. The ideas got out anyway, so this isn't a victory for free speech, it's a strategic retreat. They didn't give up on censorship because they had a change of heart. They gave up because they lost.
Because now everybody's talking about these things. No one's being censored. And it seems increasingly that nobody is even being blacklisted. So they acknowledge, they say, okay, we tried to censor the whole internet and we lost. The internet is too powerful. And at the same time that they were making arguments about free speech, which is a logical end of being a constitutional conservative, they were also trying to have it both ways and censor the things they didn't like, colluding with the left. So maybe that was never going to last. So they say, we've lost that battle. We're in retreat. What is the next line of defense? If we're conceding the internet and the information space, what's the next line of defense against the anti-Semites, the Groypers, those that would criticize Israel. Again, they're not being subtle. They're explicitly saying the next line of defense is gatekeeping. And it's funny how for all of us, these are pejorative terms, but for them, this is their MO. This is their mode of operating. We tried censorship. No, that didn't work. Let's try gatekeeping. They say it like it's a good thing. And in particular, they're saying, if we lost the open internet, what we can control, the bottleneck that we can still control, is the actual institutions. Which institutions? The political institutions. They're saying we can't control everybody's opinion on Facebook and YouTube, because there's billions of people on Facebook and YouTube. They're saying, but we can control who gets a job in politics. Okay, fine. Maybe millions of people on the internet hate us. All right, whatever. But we can apply pressure on the bottlenecks of the think tanks, the political campaigns, and the congressional offices. They said that's what we can control. We can control who gets those jobs and who gets promoted in those institutions. So we don't have to cancel everybody that says something critical of Israel on the internet. We only have to cancel the people that are critical of Israel on the internet that apply to the Heritage Foundation, that apply to the administration, the Trump administration, that work on congressional campaigns and in those offices. How are we going to control that? With our money. We can take the money, the donors, all these different funding mechanisms. We can take the money from the super PACs, the campaigns, the think tanks of those that will not police those whom they hire. They said that's like the next stage. So they're saying, in other words, listen very carefully. When Mark Levin and Shapiro go out there, they say, we're not going to cancel Tucker, because we're not saying he should be banned on YouTube. We're only saying that no one in politics should talk to him, and no one in politics can defend him. Because if you do, we will fire you. And they say, how do they say that? They say, that's the difference between no enemies in the right and a moral conservatism. Moral conservatism. In other words, there are some who would say the Republican Party's a big tent. Tucker has a right to speak. Consequently, people have a right to listen. And he's not our real enemy. The left is our enemy. That's the no enemies to our right, no enemies in the right mentality. They're creating this dialectic, this dichotomy. That's the position of like Matt Walsh. That's a position of, let's say, Tucker himself. That was the position of Kevin Roberts. Tolerating Tucker, tolerating people that like Tucker. Shapiro and Levin are saying, no, we need a moral boundary. We need a moral conservatism. We need to gatekeep the coalition, police the extremists in our own group, like Bill Buckley did. And we need to purge anybody that is sympathetic to the Israel critical group.
You hear that language? A moral conservatism, a moral boundary. This is how they sell the purge. They're creating this fake choice, this dialectic, where you're either with them, the moral ones, or you're with the extremists. But it's a branding exercise. Moral, in this context, is just a code word for obedient. It means you're loyal to the establishment, to the donors, and especially to their foreign policy consensus. They are using the language of virtue to justify a ruthless political purge. It's not about principles, it's about power.
And so what does that mean? It means we're not going to say Tucker should be banned on YouTube because they can't control YouTube, but we can ban anybody that likes Tucker from Heritage. We can ban anybody that likes Tucker from Claremont, from American Mind, which they publish, from I Am 1776, from The Blaze, from Passage Press, from the Trump administration at the personnel office. And this is how they're having their cake and eating it too. They're saying, we're not canceling him. We're only canceling him. We're not saying he can't talk on the internet. We're just saying that anyone that likes him can't have a job. But why are they saying that? It's because they lost. They're acting like they're giving us this. No, you're not giving us this. You fucking lost. You tried to make people like Tucker lose their platform. You lost. You fired him from Fox News. You tried to keep people like me banned on YouTube. You lost. I'm now allowed on people's shows as a guest on YouTube. So if they had it their way, they probably would censor Tucker. But they're saying, oh, we're not going to cancel him. Yeah, because you can't cancel him in that way. So they're retreating to the next line of defense, which is, we just want to fire anybody that sympathizes. And that's how they're going to gatekeep the GOP. Power. And that's the operative word. This is what I've always been telling my followers. We can rile everybody up. A lot of people watch the show. But the people in power don't really care if you're riled up, if you're not doing anything.
So, there you have it. The playbook, laid bare. They lost the war on information, so now they're waging a war on institutions. They've retreated from public censorship to professional blacklisting. They're creating a permanent, unemployable class of dissidents. You can have your ideas, but you can't have a career. You can speak your mind, but you can't have a seat at the table. This is the establishment's last stand. The question is, how long will the base continue to support a movement whose leaders are actively working to purge them?